I'm probably not going to be real preachy tonight. I just want to talk about the state of minds that a lot of us get in, and a lot of times when I'm talking to people, and one of the things I'll ask if I'm meeting someone for the first time that has a problem, or they want to meet with me, and that happens pretty regularly. I meet with a lot of folks. One of the things I ask is, what is your great passion in life? What are you passionate about? What is it that your heart is really geared toward? And I'll usually ask, are you happy? Are you happy? And you know, the most that any of us can be in this life is saved and happy. And being saved should go a long way to make you happy. In Deuteronomy, Moses said, "Happy art thou, O Israel, who is like unto thee, O people saved by the Lord." So they were happy, should be happy, because you're saved. But finding that place of contentment and happiness can become very elusive. It don't have to do with how much money you've got, how much prestige you've got. It has to do whether you've come to grips with where you are with God and with your fellow man, with your family, and found that place of contentment and joy. Joyce and I were at the classic car wash the other day. We're getting ready to travel, and I had about an inch of dust on everything. We pulled in there and let them clean my car up. And there's a fella, he comes out to church RU program sometimes. Sometimes he rides a bicycle out. He hitchhikes or walks part of the way, and he pulled up in there on a bicycle. And I asked him how he was doing. And he had a smile on his face and said, "I'm doing good." I said, "Where are you staying?" He said, "Oh, under the bridges here and there, and just wherever I can." And I remember having that conversation with him out here at RU one night. Where are you staying? How are you surviving? What are you eating? And he said, "Oh, I do good." He said, "I've learned to survive on the street, and I'm pretty happy. I do pretty well." And he confirmed that to me again the other day down there. Didn't have a thing. And I've known this boy since he was that high. He had some mental health issues he had to deal with, but he's happy. I remember one night years ago, he was a teenager then, and I remember one night he ran from the police. And he bailed out of the car out by Delaware, and of all people to run from, he ran from Danny Craig. Anybody know Danny? He was here the other night at the meeting. And Danny can run about 25 miles before he ever gets warmed up. So he didn't outrun Danny Craig. Danny caught him, and but this boy's kind of a sweet boy. And he's not a boy anymore. He's a man. But he said he's surviving on the street. He was as happy or happier than some of you folks sitting here tonight. Now, how is that? Because Paul said, "I have learned in whatever state I am in, therewith to be content." And we have to learn that contentment. And it don't have to do with money. Some of the most wealthy, some of the most celebrated people in this country, you'll read it where they've committed suicide. They can't handle it, can't take the pressure. I remember reading a story years ago, Neon Dion. Remember Deion Sanders? Great football player. Played baseball too, I guess, for the Reds. And Deion Sanders told the story maybe on WLW, one of the sports shows, how he was driving around 275 one night and said he came to himself, he was just going to kill himself. He said he'd got out of the car. He had it in his head he was going to kill himself. I believe that's how the story goes. And said he found God. He found God, and everything changed for Neon Dion. See, the light came on. It wasn't a neon light. It was a glorious light of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and he got saved. And he found peace with God. You've heard of folks saying back years ago, a generation or two ago, they'd say, well, did he make peace with God? Somebody would be on their deathbed or have some disease. And one of the questions that would get asked was, did he make peace with God? Well, you can make peace with God in order to have the peace of God. God gives you that peace. The Bible says, and the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will keep your hearts and minds. And finding that place of contentment and some joy in life and some happiness. Now, Joyce and I are going away. We're going to Louisville until Thursday. Then we're going on down to Central Florida, where Joyce grew up. And she grew up not far from where Disney World is right now. In fact, I think they tried to get her to play the part of Minnie Mouse, and she said she didn't want anything to do with it. In fact, the folks in her neighborhood didn't care much for Disney. They said that they ruined that Central Florida when Disney World came out. That neither here nor there. But when I met Joyce, it was mostly orange groves in that part of Florida. Joyce was a secretary for the Florida State Citrus Commission. Her boss was one of the two fellows who invented orange juice concentrate. C.D. Atkins was his name, a real bright fellow. We went out to his house a couple of times. Old hillbilly, but IQ of probably about 170. Just brilliant a man. But finding that place of peace and joy, and I said that to say this, we're getting away because in the last month there was a 2.5-week period that I preached 6 funerals in a 2.5-week period. Man, that'll get you down. It's hard to have fun when all people that you love are dying around you. It's kind of tough, and it'll get you down. Paul Johnson, Paul's been a friend of mine all his life. John Gibbs, my neighbor, and I love Brother John, having to bury both of them. Diane Turner, sweet girl, I've known her forever, just one after another. Buried my brother not too long ago, and my niece, his daughter, not long before. Man, I got to go somewhere. I got to go somewhere and hide. But in spite of all that, there's an underlying foundational joy that we have as a Christian. You know, I've talked about this before, where it's my understanding that the two main types of depression, one of them is termed situational. When it involves a situation that you're placed in, something's going on that has brought about depression. And the other is clinical, where it's an enzyme, a chemical in the brain that just your brain don't produce enough of it, and that lack of that enzyme causes you to be depressed. And they're both dangerous. But I look around the room, those folks got a lot of reason to be depressed situationally. You know, I see Rachel back there losing her mom and her dad and a husband, the love of her life, you know, and in just a short time. So you gotta call on that spiritual reserve of the joy of the Lord to find that peace and that contentment. You got to dig down there, because the joy of the Lord isn't situational; it's foundational. Paul said, "Rejoice always," and again I say rejoice. And he was in jail when he wrote that, so you figure that one out. He's in jail. He and Silas are trying to sing songs at midnight in the jail. And then I look at myself, and you'll get down, and you ever get where you just can't feel good? No matter what you do, it's hard to feel good. You want to feel good, and you don't have any reason not to feel good. But then you kind of rest on that foundation of the joy of the Lord, knowing that one day it's going to be better. One day there's coming a time. There's coming a day. Man, I look forward to that. But Paul, all he had been through, he told one time everything he had been through, shipwrecked, beaten, stuffed and cuffed and tased, jailed. I don't know if they had tasers back then, but he was stuffed and cuffed. Well, I don't know if they had cuffs back then. I guess they did. But he's talking to these folks in Philippians, says, therefore, my brethren, dearly beloved and longed for, Philippians 4:1, my joy and crown, so stand fast in the Lord, my dearly beloved. Then he addressed, this is interesting. Seems like Brian McBride might have preached on this verse one time. He said, I beseech Euodias and beseech Syntyche, that they be of the same mind in the Lord. So evidently these two gals weren't getting along very good in church. Now, I've never seen that happen. But ever seen it happen where two ladies didn't? Well, let me move on. But evidently that's what was going on here. So Paul says, I beseech Euodias and beseech Syntyche that they be of the same mind in the Lord. Let me move on. And I entreat thee also, true yokefellow, help those women which labored with me in the gospel. And it looks like here that the women are doing all the work like it is in most churches. I'm going to get myself in trouble. Let me move on. With Clement also and with other my fellow laborers whose names are in the book of life. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again I say rejoice. Man, that's good. Let your moderation be known unto all men. You know, moderation will teach you to be content and to find peace. You know, my mama lived a very frugal life. She would not let anyone do anything for her. Anything that went wrong at her house, we'd have to find it because she wouldn't tell us. The bathtub drain would be stopped up, and we wouldn't know it until somebody happened to run some water one day for something, find out that her drain didn't work. She wouldn't tell anybody. You'd never know it. The only money she had coming in was Social Security. Nothing else. And she had money in the bank. Figure that one out. Figure that one out. And we tried putting in. Jeff, didn't you guys put a satellite dish up there? We was going to, just make her so happy. Put in a big satellite dish. And she never watched TV. Said, get rid of that thing. I don't watch any of that. She didn't. She'd sit out on the porch, be content, loved her garden, loved nature. Big mockingbird would always make its home in a lilac bush out in the corner of the yard. She loved those things around her and found contentment and peace and all those things that money can't buy. Money didn't do it for her. In fact, she was always asking us, need any money? Need any money? Wow. So a lot of it's a state of mind and how we set ourselves up in this life, whether we're going to find that peace of God and that contentment and that happiness. Not everybody does, and it's getting to the point not many do. Let your moderation be known unto all men. And you know what happens now? And I went up to visit somebody at Franklin County a while back at the jail, and I ran into Ken Murphy. Ken Murphy is a sheriff in Franklin County. I used to know him back in the day when he was a excise officer for the state of Indiana. He said, hey, come on back to my office. So I went back there, and we're talking scripture. And he knew quite a bit about the Bible. Surprised me, but he did. He knew quite a bit about the Bible. And he said, you know, Tom said, what I think happened, he said, now this is just my opinion. This is the sheriff of Franklin County. He said, this is just my opinion, and I know it isn't politically correct, but you know what I see is when everything started going downhill was back during the war when the women started working in the factories. Then when the men came home, the women kept working. And then you had the two incomes, and you know what it did? It took the homemaker out of the home, and the incomes went up. So when the incomes went up, the toys got more expensive. Bigger houses. Newer cars. Boats. He may be right. He may be right. It wasn't the first time I heard that. But it seems like the more that we get, we're still in about the same boat because we just spend it on more expensive toys. bigger things, better things, nicer things. Where does it stop? Yeah, does that give you happiness? I've probably made this comment before. I used to drive over to Berean Baptist Church at Brighton. I'd drive across North Dearborn Road. And you'd go across that road and you'd see those homes, $250,000 homes up on the hill. And you may have a $400,000 home. That's okay. But the one thing that I noticed differently about those big, fancy homes on the hill was you would never see kids playing out in the yard. Monuments. But where are the kids? Where are the swings and the tires tied to a tree for a kid swinging on and all that stuff? Man, when I was in the country, you go by the house, kids would be out everywhere. They'd be climbing apple trees and jumping around doing this. I don't know. Just because you make more money, you got nicer stuff, bigger, better stuff, is no guarantee that you're going to find contentment and happiness and the peace of God. God has to give that to you. Has to come from God. And according to Paul, those things you have to learn. You got to let God teach you those things, and we'll get to that. Be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving let your requests be known unto God. And the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. Then he said, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things. I think of those verses quite a bit. One of the conclusions that I'm coming to with the addictions programs is if someone has an addiction, one of the principal things that they have to do is trade in that addiction and become addicted to something healthy. They need to change their activity from this to that. God says, let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him work with his hands. Says, lie not, but every man tell truth with his neighbor. It says, be not drunken with wine wherein is excess, but instead of that, you be filled with the Spirit. So you trade in your bad habit, the habit that's causing you grief, and you trade it for a good habit. You think on these things. Don't even think about it, because it all begins with the thought. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Isn't that how the verse goes? So you think on these things, the healthy things, the good things, the godly things, the spiritual things, instead of thinking about this carnal stuff that comes into your mind. And you occupy that mind with these things instead of the things of the flesh and the lust of the flesh. He said in verse 9, said, those things which ye have both learned and received and heard and seen in me do, and the God of peace shall be with you. But I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that now at the last your care of me hath flourished again. They're taking care of, making some provision for him, helping him out. Has flourished again, wherein you were also careful, but ye lacked, opportunity. They may have been to a point where they couldn't help him. They couldn't provide for him, but now they're doing it again. Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned. Here it is. I have learned. In whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. That don't come naturally. We always want more. We always want more. Jeff used to kind of turn his head when I'd talk about that old Tom T. Hall song. Faster horses, younger women, older whiskey, and more money. It's always something better than what we've got, isn't it? That's a nature. That's a foolishness of the flesh. But Paul says here, I know how to be abased. That means he knows how to live frugally. He knows when he's on the bottom, he knows how to survive there. He knows how to be content. When he's abased, I both know how to be abased and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I am instructed, there's that being learning again, he's being instructed, both to be full and to be hungry. Both to abound and to suffer need. Then he says, I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. And boy, you can read that 14 different ways. Is it Christ? I can do all things which strengtheneth me, or I do all things through Christ? Is it Christ that strengthens you? I think the latter. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. I want you to notice verse 11. He says, I have learned in whatsoever state to be contented. Then he gives us some examples. In verse 12, he says he is content when he is abased. He's content when he abounds, or things are going well for him. He's content when he's full. He's content when he is hungry. I haven't got to that point yet. If I'm hungry, it'll be a short message. I can tell you that much. I'm a bear until I get something to eat in the morning. Joyce will tell you that. I mean, I make provision for the flesh before I go to bed. I've got my sausage fixed and ready to put in the microwave while the egg's frying, and a piece of toast in the toaster. The coffee pot's got the coffee making, and it all comes together in just about 10 minutes. Everything's ready. Oh, well. That's more information, really, than you needed here tonight. But he said, I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. So Paul is saying that the way he's able to do this stuff, the way he's able to find this contentment is through Christ. The way Paul was able to find contentment in every situation was through Jesus Christ. No matter what adversity he was going through, it was because of Christ. He had learned that no matter what, he had found a way to be content. Why? Because he had Jesus Christ. Wow. What did the Lord tell him? The Lord put that thorn in his flesh when he was given the abundance of the revelations, and it was all God said to keep him from being lifted up. He gave him a thorn in the flesh because of the abundance of revelation to humble him. And 3 times Paul went to the Lord, asked him to take it away from him. I'm not sure what it was. I've heard some fancy terms, some folks say ophthalmia or something, where he'd go blind in the pain from an eye or something. I don't know what it was. Don't say. But 3 times he went to the Lord over that infirmity of his flesh, and the Lord said no. The Lord said, my grace is sufficient for you. Is it sufficient for me? I kind of like my car. I could go back to an old beat-up pickup truck, and, it got me there just the same. What? There used to be an old bluegrass song. I can't even think the words. Better not say them. She'll be coming around the mountain, darling Corey. Something about my girl. She wears that sweet smelling perfume. Rich girl wears that sweet smelling perfume. Poor girls do the same. My girl don't wear any perfume at all, but you can smell her just the same. It's something like that. But that old beat-up pickup truck, I used to drive a 1940s pickup truck over to Bishop Farm on Holt Road in Dearborn County and pick tomatoes in the summer. Now, I'm going back a while. I was 14 years old, and my daddy let me drive that truck over those backcountry roads to get to the tomato fields. The starter was on the floorboard, a big knob out there you pressed with your foot, and the other one on the gas, and you pulled that choke out about halfway. pulled that choke out about halfway and hit that starter. Anybody remember that? No, everybody's looking fun. Some of you old timers are getting it. Let me move on. But it got me to where I was going. If I'd been in a new Fleetwood Cadillac, it wouldn't have got me. All it would have done was got me there. Let me move on. But whatever adversity Paul went through, because of Christ, he had learned to be okay with it. Here's the verse, 2 Corinthians 11:24. He said, of the Jews, 5 times received I 40 stripes, save one. Can you imagine that, getting beaten 5 times? 39 stripes with a whip 5 times? After about the 3rd time, there'd be some dead folks around me, I think. Evidently, that's before the Smith & Wesson folks came on the scene, or Samuel Colt. All right. Thrice I was beaten with rods. That's apart from the whip. Took rods to his back. Once I was stoned. Thrice I suffered shipwreck. Now, I learned a little bit about that because I fell out of the boat here about 2 years ago. Well, no, that don't count. A night and a day I have been in the deep, in journeyings often, in perils of waters, in perils of robbers, in perils of mine own countrymen, in perils by the heathen. Wow. In perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea. Man, he's had a rough life. In perils among false brethren. Well, I'm glad that don't happen anymore. In weariness and painfulness, in watchings often, nobody said a word. In hunger and thirst, in fastings often. That don't happen much anymore either. In cold and naked. Can you imagine all that stuff he went through? Wow. He'd been through it all. And he says, for I've learned, in whatever state I'm in, therewith to be content. He learned to be content whether it was good, bad, or ugly. Only God can do that. The flesh can't do that. The carnal man can't do that. One night Paul and Silas preaching over in Macedonia, and Acts 16 says that Paul commanded a spirit of divination to come out of a woman. And after that, man, the crowd grabbed him, beat them, threw him in jail. They both had their feet in stocks. I mean, these preachers having a bad night, rough night, beaten, bruised. And that's a cold system. That being in jail is a cold system. I go visit folks in jail, and I worked as a policeman going to jails. You can feel the cold as soon as you walk in that place. It's a cold system. You know, a lot of places you just go to visit someone, and you feel like they try to make you feel like a dog just for going and seeing someone. So here's Paul and Silas. They've both been through the mill. And it says in verse 22 there of Acts 16, the magistrates rent off their clothes and commanded to beat them. And when they had laid many stripes upon them, they cast them into the prison. They had a lot to complain. If anybody's going to complain, if anybody was going to start telling folks how bad they had it, they had a good reason to, don't you think? But they didn't call the ALCU, I guess is the word I'm looking for, Bob's bail bonds. Around verse 25 said all of a sudden around midnight the prisoner they'd hear something. And at midnight Paul and Silas prayed and sang praises unto God, and the prisoners heard them. Hey, you guys knock it off down there, trying to sleep. Back in the day, they'd rattle those tin cups along in bars. After everything had happened to them, they were praying and singing praises to God. Man, you look at what kind of men that God raised up back in those days. I can't imagine me doing that. I'm not that good a man. But Paul said, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. How could he do that? Because he said, I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. Prisoner on a ship on the way to Italy, passed by Crete. Big storm came up, Euroclydon. That's a wild sounding name. Man, you talk about a storm, man, they all knew they were going to die. The Bible says all hope, it says in Acts 28 and verse 20, all hope that we should be saved was taken away. Paul said, be of good cheer, folks. And they wanted to knock him out. That's what he said. He said, be of good cheer. He said, I exhort thee, be of good cheer, for I kind of heard from the Lord tonight and said there will be no loss of life. Only the ship. Be of good cheer. Man, we've got to learn from this great cloud of witnesses that God has given us through Scripture. I was doing my prayer walk last night, big full moon. I was trying to figure out what star was what. And the North Star. And find Polaris, of course, from the Big Dipper. Every coon hunter knows how to find that North Star from the Big Dipper. And then there's another group called the Belt of Orion. It's not visible right now. It was a few months ago. You could see the Belt of Orion. It's shaped like a kite. You'll see it in the tail of that kite if you look at it like a kite. Always points due south, no matter where you see it in the night sky. Coon hunters know all those little groups of stars. There's another little thing that looks like the Little Dipper, but it's really not the Little Dipper, but the handle, that always points east. I haven't seen that in several months. I don't know what time of the year that shows up. But I'm on that prayer walk, and I'm going through my list. It was Saturday night. I was praying for the preachers preaching today, that God would give them power and help them, and souls would be saved, and put some power in them. Went through my alphabetical prayer list and thinking of folks and their kids, and started getting burdened down with kids. And I said to myself, how do people do it with their kids? I mean, I'm burdened down over everything. If I had kids on top of that, man, you'd have to come visit me at the mental health center. How do you deal with it? There's only one way you can deal with that, through Christ. You got to let the Lord teach you, that you might learn how to find that foundational joy no matter what's going on. It's hard to do. Then on top of that, you need to find happiness. Happiness. I think with the state of the culture, it's such a sinful, godless culture, that there's an enormous, especially for a preacher or somebody trying to live for God, preacher or not, anybody trying to live for God, you're going to have that amount of depression just over the state of the world and the state of your country, the state of the culture, society, where everything that God calls abomination and bad, that everybody around you says, no, that's not bad, that's good. And God says, no, that's bad. Happy are thy men. Remember that? Queen of Sheba, she came up there and saw how happy everybody was because they were serving God. Talks about your kids. Happy is somebody that's got a quiver full of kids. I thought of that verse last night. Psalms 128:2 says, for thou shalt eat the labor of thine hands. Happy shall thou be, and it shall be well with thee. That's folks serving God. Happy is that people that is in such a case. Yea, happy is that people whose God is the Lord. That's where we find it. That is Psalms 144:15. Happy is he that hath the God of Jacob for his help, whose hope is in the Lord his God. Happy is the man that findeth wisdom, and the man that getteth understanding. We talked about that this morning. The only way you're going to find peace in this life, it isn't going to be about how much money you make, and how many new jobs you get, and whether you go to a six-figure income. Only place you're going to find peace is through Jesus Christ, the peace of God. Do you have that peace tonight? Do you have that joy? Is there a degree of happiness in your life and joy? He said, rejoice always. The Lord told the disciples, rejoice rather because your names are written down in heaven. We've got a lot to rejoice about. We shouldn't be unhappy, but we'll get down. Christians get down like anybody else, and I feel guilty sometimes. I'll get down, and I know I don't have a reason to get down because I've got God. I've got a promise of eternal life. One day I'm going to cross that river. This body's getting old. It'll wear out, and the flesh will die. Peter said, I said that verse today, shortly I must put off this, my tabernacle, to an inheritance undefiled, incorruptible, and that fadeth not away. Going to walk across that river, and I think my mama and daddy's going to be there, and my aunts and uncles, and all the people that I loved, and my brother Aubrey. I'm going to see all those folks. Man, it's going to be a happy day. Something to look forward to. Something to look forward to. Everyone stand up. If you're here tonight, you've never trusted Jesus Christ, you need to do that. What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? Maybe you're bogged down. Maybe your life's in a mess and you're in a rut and you're bogged down and you're about to your wits' end. You're so depressed and you're so down. God is the answer. You need to start thinking on different things. Things that are lovely, just, of a good report, things that edify, all those things. You need to think on those things. Trade that bad habit you've got for something good and wholesome, things that are honest and just. Think on those things. The altar is open tonight as we sing, Jeff.
308.
308.
308.